We'll get by with a little help from our friends. Indeed, we will. Right, let's get into the show. On the $500 million, extraordinary that, National Guard price tag to man the US Capitol for more than 5 months following the January 6th staged riot has emptied the National Guard's coffers and will affect readiness if Congress does not act, according to the National Guard Chief General Daniel Hokanson. Now, the National Guard members were deployed in 2020 for more than 21 million service days to respond to missions including the domestic COVID-19 response, hurricane relief, fighting wildfires, protecting cities ravaged by the George Floyd protests, and overseas missions. Which is kind of interesting, the last one. What is overseas missions? But the Guard's largest and most expensive mission was to protect the US Capitol, including providing security for the presidential inauguration and the much criticised militarisation of the US Capitol grounds with razor wire and 7-foot non-scalable fences. Now, the peak deployment in the nation's capital required 26,000 service members from all 50 states, US territories and the District of Columbia, and the National Guard footed the bill to meet the request by US Capitol Police, Secret Service, Park Service and others, which did not have adequate personnel or protective measures in place, following the breach of the Capitol grounds by what the media believe is pro-Trump rioters. In reality, it was the non-Speaker of the House staged event. But the simple solution to this is get Pelosi to pay for it all, as her and her cronies arranged and carried out that staged event for their own gains. Split the cost with all media giants as well, as they were also complicit. But the great question is the next stage to replace the National Guard as well by defunding them? And at which point do people in those organisations begin to see the writing on the wall? And this is like the FEMA programme. In goes lots of funds, out goes much of it in false claims via the back door to agency-controlled private organisations. And Trump could have stopped that, as he had a $105 billion plan to replace FEMA and create hundreds of thousands of jobs. And like everything else in his tenure, he didn't deliver. The US drugs giant Johnson & Johnson is to pay $230 million to settle claims it fueled an opioid addiction crisis in New York State. Now, the firm did not admit liability or wrongdoing in settling with the state. It's a common theme there. Why pay $230 million then? Like I said, a common theme, as we will find out more on that later. And the payments remove it from a trial due to begin on Tuesday, in which several large opioid makers and distributors are defendants. Johnson & Johnson said the settlements were consistent with a prior agreement to pay $5 billion to settle US opioid claims. And the settlement with New York State also calls for J&J to stop selling the painkillers nationwide. And yet these are the very people, Johnson & Johnson, the masses trust to inject themselves with more poisons. Message to the injected masses. Don't forget this week to go out and buy your Johnson & Johnson baby powder. I hear it's great for your skin. and it has the added bonus of giving you cancer. And then it gets real exciting, because then you can go and buy more of their pills. Unreal. As John McAfee is found in a Spanish cell doing an Epstein and allegedly committed suicide when the authorities were after him for daring to go against the system, the 75-year-old entrepreneur was arrested on tax evasion charges for failing to file tax returns for 4 years. And he has been in jail in Spain since October the 6th, facing charges that he hid significant assets, which included real estate and a yacht. And his defence lawyers had argued that the extradition request was politically motivated, it was, and therefore wasn't appropriate. Now, he disagreed with the current monetary system, which made him public enemy number one, according to court documents released on Wednesday. Now, the US calculates that McAfee owed them more than $4.2 million in taxes, according to the documents, and the ruling came as the latest setback for McAfee, but it wasn't the start of his legal troubles. Back in March, the SEC accused him of hiding cryptocurrency income of more than $23 million. And the Manhattan U.S. Attorney Audrey Strauss has said McAfee exploited a widely used social media platform and enthusiasm among investors in the emerging cryptocurrency market to make millions through lies and deception. The questions arising from this is, 1. Is the SEC tracking everyone's cryptocurrency, or is it just selective and those they deem as a threat? And 2, how is it possible, or is it a coincidence, that two high-profile people placed in jail, which is rare in and of itself, can both commit suicide? We're going to my hometown next. School sent out a warning message to parents after children discovered using fruit juice created a false positive on coronavirus tests. The Gattaca School in Belle Vale sent out an email to parents on Wednesday warning them to be vigilant whilst their children are taking lateral flow COVID tests, whatever that means. An email was sent after it came to the attention of teachers that pupils had discovered placing droplets of orange juice or other fruit juice on a lateral flow test gave a false positive result. And on Monday, Gattaca School told pupils in year 7, 8, 9 and 10 not to attend school while staff carried out track and trace work, after a number of students tested positive for COVID-19 over the weekend. Now, the school told the local paper there's no evidence their pupils have been misusing the tests. And the email read, nationally, some school students have discovered that placing droplets of orange juice or other fruit juice on an LFD test gets a false positive result. And in light of this, you can be extra vigilant when your child is doing the LFD tests. And also remind them that a positive LFD test must be followed by a confirmatory PCR test. Now, the head teacher insisted the message was sent after they were made aware of students in other schools in the country obtaining void or positive results by pouring orange juice into COVID tests. That is classic. What a way to get off school ladders. But the irony is, a group of young children can ruin the so-called geniuses and experts test with orange juice. I guess you've been tangoed. Or perhaps the agents were oranged. More on that later. An indigenous nation in Canada says it's found another 751 unmarked graves at the site of a former residential school in Saskatchewan. I finally got it right. The Cow-SS First Nation said the discovery was the most significantly substantial to date in Canada. And this just comes weeks after the remains of 215 children were found at a similar residential school in British Columbia. And said this is not a mass grave site, these are unmarked graves, said the First Nation chief Cadmus Delorme. And the Marieville Indian Residential School was operated by the Roman Catholic Church from 1899 to 1997 in the area where Cow-SS is now located in southeastern Saskatchewan. But it's not yet clear if all of the remains are linked to the school. Now, that school was one of more than 130 compulsory boarding schools funded by the Canadian government and run by religious authorities during the 19th and 20th centuries with the aim of assimilating Indigenous youth. Brainwashing, in other words. An estimated 6,000 children died while attending these schools, due in large part to the squalid health conditions inside. Students were often housed in poorly built, poorly heated and unsanitary facilities. Now, what I can add to that is some of the students or youth in these schools were also subject to MKUltra US military mind control as well. They also had research centres out of Canada run by Dr. Green, who was injecting the children with various diseases and leaving the unvaccinated children in the room, and they all died. Many, many of them. And it's just shocking. And yet we still have large amounts of people who think that their governments will look after them. You have to say, what a bunch of conspiracy theorists and nuts they are. And you have to ask, how much evidence do these people need before you wake up and not just smell the coffee, but the countless dead amongst our own peoples? And more evidence of it will unfold in our expose later in the show. A female linguist who worked for the Pentagon in Iraq was sentenced to 23 years behind bars for giving classified information to the Hezbollah-tied foreign national. Miriam Taha Thompson was charged in May 2020 in federal court with transmitting highly sensitive classified national defense information to a foreign national. Really? If that's the case, why isn't the whole of Israel in jail then? Same thing. Who she believed would provide the information to the Lebanese-based Hezbollah, a foreign terrorist organization tied to Iran. In reality, Hezbollah at the very top are all ran by Mossad agents. Just saying. Remember the saying, we fund both sides of the war and profit off them both. All about the shekels. Ain't that right, Mr. Finkelstein? Now, court records show Thompson had signed an extensive statement of facts in late January, admitting to the covert plot, and she pled guilty in March. She faced a maximum sentence of up to life imprisonment. Now, the Justice Department said Thompson admitted in a guilty plea hearing beginning in 2017. She started communicating with their unindicted co-conspirator using a video chat feature on a secure text and voice messaging application, and that she developed a romantic interest in a co-conspirator. Who is the unindicted co-conspirator, one might ask? Now, Thompson, according to the Justice Department, learned that the unindicted co-conspirator had a family member who was in the Lebanese Ministry of the Interior, and that the unindicted co-conspirator claimed to have received a ring from Hassan Nasrallah, who is the Secretary General of the Lebanese Hezbollah. I guess the Israeli junta came down hard on her, as it is subjective these days as to whom is classed as a terrorist. To many people around the world, the terrorists are Israel, stealing and bombing people's lands and homes, and yet the Justice Department in this country ignores those obvious terrorist attacks, including on USS Cole, was it? No, it wasn't Cole. The 1967 incident when Israel bombed a US destroyer, killing loads of Americans, and labels all those who go against that country as a terrorist. And then you've got those who are anti-government terrorists. Coming soon, a new classification. Those who are unvaxxed are domestic terrorists. Now, people may laugh at that comment, but that is exactly how these idiot puppets of the Hebrew Anunnaki are told to think. The employees and clients of investment bank Morgan Stanley, trustees' favourite bank, who have not been fully vaccinated against the Wuhan coronavirus, will be barred from entering the bank's offices in New York. Starting July 12th, all employees, contingent workforce, clients and visitors will be required to attest to being fully vaccinated to access Morgan Stanley's building in New York City and Westchester, according to an internal memo signed by Chief Human Resources Officer Mandel Crawley. Now, the memo added that the vaccine mandate was put in place to speed up the process of reopening its offices. Yeah, right. And Crawley said any employee, client or visitor of Morgan Stanley properties in New York will lose their privilege to access the building if they remain unvaccinated. He added that the overwhelming majority of staff have already reported getting vaccinated. They're not going to last, are they? And the company has already implemented vaccine-only workspaces in some of its divisions, including its wealth management, better known as Vulture Capitalism, and Institutional Securities Division. Now, only one other Wall Street firm has banned unvaccinated employees from entering its offices. Guess who that is? BlackRock. Well, I never. Bank of America is about or has made a similar policy, and it will prioritise the return of vaccinated staff to its offices by early September, and the bank said it will make arrangements for unvaccinated employees at a later time. Now, earlier this month, Goldman Sachs made it mandatory for staff to disclose their vaccination status. The simple solution to this, to correct it, is for everyone to close your Chase accounts, credit cards and loans, and make them pay for their cabal-level programs. Welcome to Morgan Stanley Bank. We are the new leper colony. To bring to completion a story that THI was the first to highlight within the alt media, the NXIVM story. US actress Allison Mack has been sentenced to just 3 years in prison for her role in the NXIVM sex cult, and a 38-year-old admitted racketeering and conspiracy charges in April 2019 related to her efforts to recruit women for the cult. Now, last year, cult leader Keith Raniere was handed 120 years in prison for multiple crimes, including forcing women to be his sexual slaves. 3 years, really. South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma has also been sentenced to 15 months in jail by the country's highest court, and he has been given 5 days to hand himself into police. Failing that, the police minister must order his arrest. I can smell another suicide coming on. And the sentence comes after the Constitutional Court found him guilty of contempt for defying its order to appear at an inquiry into corruption while he was president. And Mr. Zuma's time in power, which ended in 2018, was dogged by graft allegations. Businessmen were accused of conspiring with politicians to influence the decision-making process. And in a separate legal matter, Mr. Zuma pleaded not guilty last month in his corruption trial involving a $5 billion arms deal from the 1990s. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has offered condolences to the dozens of people who have died in a record-setting heatwave in Canada. Abnormally high temperatures have been recorded across North America, and Trudeau's comments came after Canada saw a new record, 49.6 centigrade, which is 121.3 Fahrenheit, for the third day in a row. Predictably, he and other clowns linked it to climate change. But not when the weather manipulators are hanging high and low pressure points to create it, is it not? Another one of the unholy four died this week, Donald Rumsfeld, the guy that brought us the poisonous aspartame, the guy involved in the 9/11 plot with the psychopaths Bush and Cheney, in alliance, let's not forget, with Rudy Giuliani. Sympathies to his friends and families must be paid, but forgive me for not being too upset that this evil man has now passed on to meet his maker. Earlier this month, when Axios reported that private contractors, here we go again, were finding massive amounts of fraud in the state and federal unemployment programs, the news was met with disbelief. Now, the amount being discovered was so large, it was estimated that up to half of all unemployment benefits shelled out by the US over the past year, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, may have been stolen. Really? But now the skepticism is being replaced by astonishment as states are starting to verify the reports. Maryland announced that 508,000 unemployment claims have been confirmed as fraudulent in just the last month and a half, and 1.3 million since the federal government began offering enhanced benefits last year. The state only has 6 million people. And Governor Larry Hogan called the number astonishing. The state Labour Department said 92% of the 1.4 million unemployment claims it has investigated have turned out to be fraudulent. and it has hired private vendor LexisNexis to provide identity verification and fraud detection services. As states across the country continue to opt out of the federal benefits program, bad actors are becoming more brazen and aggressive in their attempts to exploit unemployment insurance programs, according to the state's Labor Secretary. Now, dozens of Republican-led states have been cancelling their participation in the $300 federal unemployment bonuses, and the widely criticised program was passed in March without a single Republican vote. Now, Maryland, it said, will end its participation in early July. But Axios says the losses from unemployment fraud nationwide in the past year could top $400 billion. And LexisNexis says that at least 70% of the stolen money ends up in the hands of state-backed criminal syndicates in China, Nigeria, Russia, and elsewhere. Much of the rest of the money was stolen domestically. Now, the White House responded to the reports of fraud early this month by essentially blaming the Trump administration, saying widespread fraud at the state level in pandemic unemployment insurance during the previous administration is one of the most serious challenges we inherited. But today's data from Maryland is if it's any indication, the level of fraud may have actually increased this year. Because Maryland says the largest number of fraudulent claims took place this May and June, which is nothing to do with the Trump administration. Which means the current administration had 16 to 17 months to fix the stated inherited issue and failed to do so. That is an indictment of them. 16 to 17 months. If you knew when you took over from Trump, why didn't you fix it before the funds went out? Now, the scams usually involve stealing personal information and using it to impersonate claimants. Axios said the unemployment programs are being run by bureaucrats who weren't as quick to crack down on criminals as the private companies normally are. By the time the fraud is discovered, the money is gone, often transferred abroad. And if the estimated $400 billion in taxpayer losses is accurate, it could be the largest fraud in history. By comparison, the Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme amounted to about 18 million. Now, in my opinion, those funds will have likely gone to the network of BlackRock, Blackstone, and DNC groups that are cold calling people in record numbers across the country to forcing them into selling their homes. And it gets to a point where people ought to realise governments are not there to fix issues, only create them. And they will continue to do so until we provide an alternative way of operating the government and make them all accountable. There was an article this week where it said scarcity is a lie. 553,000 homeless people, and yet there is 1.5 million homes empty and 17 million empty living spaces. Which kind of reminds me of a certain quote recently, "You will own nothing and be happy." But the great question is, what happens then, people? Will you protest? Complain to your local senator? Why do you think that will work in a closed-loop system? And the answer lies in building our own system before the runaway train effect kicks in. The answer is the TPC. And we pool our funds, resources, ideas and time to make that work for us. That then in the future gives a platform for those who realised late in the game to come and join us. And the reality is participating in the TPC now is being proactive, where you make your own choices. The latter is reactive, and your decision is based on fear, panic, and also constraints. The Hall of Records being presented recently is zero to do with the real Hall of Records that has got nothing to do with money, military, financial centres, bloodline families, and neither does it have a controller, guardian, or otherwise. So let's not muddy the waters with the guardian of the Hall of Records, as the real Hall of Records is located in at least 2 locations on this planet and is not under the control of anyone. It is only accessible by those with the right frequency, not DNA or self-appointed leaders. Those that give their DNA freely at this point, thinking they are making a point, are oblivious to the dangers or reasoning as to why they would need your DNA to begin with. Just saying.